All right, we're going to start assignment 2, which is a fantasy creature assignment. And I asked you to find some inspiration, whether it's from mythology or from popular culture. This is a Pokemon design I found online. It's a pretty straightforward design, but I like the potential that's there. And what I like about good Pokemon designs is that the silhouette of them, so I'll show you what I mean. If I take the brightness all the way down, so it's just a cutout, you can see that even just from the shapes, this tells you everything you need to know about this creature, about how it moves, about where the focal points are, about its textures, and that makes for a very strong structure on which to do your own design, where we'll add naturalistic textures and naturalistic colors and lighting and just have fun with it. So that's my inspiration. Now I need to sketch, and you can do this in your sketchbooks for sure. I'll make this really small and in the corner just as a reference, just so it's there. And in Photoshop, because I'm going to sketch digitally here, I'm going to make a new file that's just standard proportions, 8 by 10 by 350 pixels per inch. So this will be my digital sketchbook. Since for the last demo I just sketched it in a regular sketchbook and took a picture, which you can do as well. So 8 by 10 inches, 350 pixels per inch. I will call this assignment 2 sketch. And it's always good to have your name as part of the title, so you can search for it if it gets misplaced. All right, there's my white paper. I'll make a new blank layer on top of that. I'll pick a color. I'm an illustrator, so I am fond of blue line pencils. So I'll sketch in blue, make my brush size pretty small, fairly sharp, and maybe not 100% opacity. So I can kind of build it up like I would with a pencil. All right, so how do I sketch this? How do I understand it? Well, I want to first understand the skeletal structure. So I'm not trying to trace it, I'm trying to find the anatomy, the basic shapes. And creatures' heads have a cranium shape just like humans, like the fishbowl that contains the brain, but then they have a muzzle in front, where humans have a mandible underneath the cranium. Animals usually have some sort of shape in front. So this might be kind of the deer shape I'm looking for. If I wanted a cat kind of shape, it would be shorter and square, more like that. If I wanted a dog, well, there's lots of different variations. But it's like a hound dog or something, it might be longer. If I wanted a horse, it would be a lot more powerful. Right? If I want an alligator, on and on and on. Bird, depends on the type of beak. So you can see the cranium is always the same. It's only the mandible or the maw shape that changes. So deer actually have a really tricky one that I want to try to play with a little bit. So it's not longer at the bottom than the top. That looks more lizard-like. So instead, let me erase that. Instead, they're a little bit further out on the top than they are on the bottom. So those are the kind of little basic shape distinctions you want to make, even from your sketch, because it will help you define your reference. And then the neck. How does the neck connect with the head? Well, invertebrate creatures, so not insects, not shellfish, invertebrate creatures with skeletons, internal skeletons, the neck and the spine always flows into the back of the cranium. So notice I'm not trying to match this pose, I'm just trying to be informed by it. Okay, so that's how the spine works, and then you want to find the different skeletal structures. So first of all, the rib cage. A big, powerful structure. the collarbone, and that gives you the joints for the front legs. What you could think of as our elbows, right? But how do they work? These are forward bending, and then the wrist, and then the foot. And for most animals that walk on four legs, this is how it looks. You have an elbow and a wrist. So that's a hyperextended one right there. So it's locked. And then this one's bending the way that that can bend. Then the back legs are even a little bit more complicated. We think of them as backwards bending knees, but they're attached to hips. This design has a fairly long waist, maybe not quite as long as I drew it. But there's the pelvis back there. The legs come from the sides of the pelvis, just like a human pelvis, but the femur is quite short. The femur is only that length there, and then the fibia and tibia, which is our lower leg, is also quite short in this creature, just to there. And then what we think of as the long part of the leg is actually the foot. The tarsus and metatarsus bones, and then going into the toes, the phalanges, or the hooves in this case. So that's not the wrist right there. That's more like the, and it's not the ankle, it's more like the toes, where the toes joint. So what does that give you? It gives you what looks like a backwards bending knee, just because it's really the ankle joint right there. That's more dramatic. And that structure is going to matter as you move legs, and especially if we animate them. Is there a tail? The tail is just an extension of the spine. Right? So those are the structures. Okay, now that I know the anatomy, that's what matters. Now it's all of the stuff that's not bone that goes on top. So the cartilage, the muscle. So I'll switch colors here onto another layer. And first, I can design now. I'm inspired by this, but I'm going to design my own kind of feature. So my neck, I don't want it quite as thick and stocky as that. I want it a little bit longer and elegant. The ears, I like the deer-based ear. Kind of go out long from each side. The eye placement for the deer, I think that's good. So I think I'm going to reference my head on either like deer or maybe a young horse. And now I'm thinking as I sketch, where can I start getting reference from? But then the antlers are what's really special with this, right? And so you got to, the reason I will want to reference from a deer, at least partly, is so I get a believable relationship between the ears and the antlers. And then what will these antlers be made of? Well, this is all kind of organic, fun stuff. So what might I want to do with this? Well, it might make sense. Here it looks like red leaves, but it might make sense if it was more like a weeping willow. Something that camouflages a little bit better in a forest setting. But I love just the sharp edges that are coming through here, and I might want to do more of that. And so maybe I'll use some other textures with more interesting colors, like sea coral. Or if I want red leaves or petals, I might go for flowers, so tropical flowers. There's something called a jalapeno flower that might work really well. Blend all these together. Because I don't need to just take one texture as it is, I'm going to be able to layer them up, just like I did with my landscape. Now in terms of the front here, I like this kind of bushiness. I want it to be manly, but not so symmetrical, not look so hard-edged. So maybe this would reference from like a moose, a stockier kind of animal. And the legs are pretty beefy too. So the legs might be more like moose legs. But moose legs get pretty thin at the bottom. So I like the little extra spurs there, weighting the bottom to kind of balance out all this weight at the top. So I think maybe this will be from Clydesdales. I have no idea how to spell it, but the Budweiser horses. They have the big bushy feet. And you'll find when you're referencing wild animals, it's really hard to get good reference of their feet because they're always in grass, or that's not what photographers really focus on. The bottom, I think I'd like to continue this bushiness and make it look a little bit more wild. So maybe a bison or a buffalo hide that's molting would be interesting. And maybe I will thicken the neck a little bit in that way. We'll see. And then the back legs, you'll see how that skeletal structure gives way to what looks like a haunch. And so I think that will work with a moose and with the Clydesdales still. And then the tail I'm not going to worry about so much. I'll figure that out. That can always be added on. I'm not going to try to get too fancy. So the key to a good sketch for your composite is to choose your battles. Know where you want your focal points to be. So I want this to be about kind of the grace of its head, the opulence and varied textures of its antlers, its stocky body, and its fluffy feet, right? I don't want to just add like an alligator's tail to that and then add wings to that. I want to make statements where I think they're going to be most important. All right, so that's my sketch. Let me save that. First as just a PSD, because this is my digital sketch in different layers. So you can see how the skeleton is actually the most important thing. It shows me the angle of the reference I want, the angle of the head. And I pretty much chose this instead of this because this will be more flexible in terms of finding reference for. Okay. And then I'll save it just as a JPEG so I can upload it to PhotoBucket. And now I go to Google and I start searching for things. Searching for things like a bison or just a deer to start with. And remember, since we're using other people's pixels, we're doing an image search, search tools, size larger than 10 megapixels. So don't waste time looking at reference that's not a high enough resolution. Then you right click and you open them in a new tab. And I'm going to avoid reference where the animal is looking at me because that's not what I sketched. I'm going to try to match this anatomy up. But there should be plenty from the side as well. And if not, I just use different search terms. Oh, this is interesting. I think those are like dik-diks or something, or tamirs, or I don't go to the zoo enough. But this might be helpful. So just reference. That's the kind of skeleton I'm basing mine on. I'm going to save that off to the side. Oh, that's a Java mouse deer. That's freaky looking. I like it. But then you have to zoom in, make sure it's a good photo. Make sure it's high enough resolution and basically in good enough focus that you can use it. And you want a lot of overlap. We're doing our creature from head to toe. So it's nice that the neck flows into the back this way. Even though my creature is facing to the right, it's very easy to flip the negative. So don't worry about that. Okay, that head position actually doesn't help me too much. This one very well might though.